August 7th, 1976, just after sunrise. Dumbfoundling Bay, a shallow stretch of brown water tucked between North Miami Beach and the Intracoastal Waterway. Three fishermen were working the flats when one of them noticed something bobbing near the channel that had no business bobbing at all. A 55-gallon steel drum, rusted, wrapped in heavy chain. The kind of drum you'd find behind any gas station in Florida, except this one was riding low in the water, like it was carrying something. Police opened it on the bank. Inside was the decomposing body of a 71-year-old man. He had been strangled. He had been stabbed. His legs had been sawn off and packed into the drum beside his torso, because a 6-foot man does not fit in a 55-gallon barrel unless somebody makes him fit. The drum had been weighted with chain, and it had been punched full of holes so that it would fill, sink to the bottom of the bay, and stay there forever. Hold on to that detail. The holes. Because that barrel was never supposed to be found. And the fact that it was found, the fact that it came back up, is the only reason you know this story at all. The man inside the barrel was John Roselli, Handsome Johnny, the Silver Fox, the Chicago outfit's ambassador to Hollywood, the fixer who helped carve up Las Vegas, and one of the only men in American history who could connect the Central Intelligence Agency, the Mafia, and the White House in a single sentence because he had lived in the space where all three met. No witnesses, no suspects, no arrests. Not then, not ever. This wasn't just another Florida floater. 11 months earlier, Johnny Roselli had sat in a closed room in Washington and told United States senators about the most explosive secret of the Cold War, that the American government had hired the Mafia to assassinate Fidel Castro. He knew who the CIA sent. He knew what the mob delivered. He knew the code names, the poison, the payments, and the men who swore under oath it never happened. And by the summer of 1976, the men who shared that secret were dying, one by one. In order. This is the story of how a sick immigrant kid named Filippo Sacco reinvented himself as the smoothest gangster in Hollywood. How the United States government came to him when it wanted a foreign head of state murdered. And how the secret he kept as life insurance turned into the exact reason somebody folded him into a steel drum and dropped him in a Florida bay. But here's the part nobody tells you. When the CIA offered Johnny Roselli $150,000 for the Castro job, more than $1.5 million in today's money, he turned it down. He did the job for free. He told his handler he was doing it because he was a loyal American, and the country he did it for spent its gratitude trying to deport him, then watched him surface in a barrel, and then closed the file. Stay with me, because how that happens, how a man becomes that useful and that disposable at the same time, reveals something about power in America that almost nobody wants to understand. To understand the man in the barrel, you have to go back to July 4th, 1905, the 4th of July, a village called Esperia in the hills south of Rome. Filippo Sacco was born to a poor family that, like half of southern Italy in those years, was already looking west. His mother brought him to the tenements of East Boston as a small boy. His father died young. And by his teens, Filippo was running with street crews, in and out of trouble, until by most accounts, a narcotics arrest around 1922 convinced him that Filippo Sacco had no future on the East Coast. So he did something that would quietly shape the rest of his life, and the end of it, he erased himself. He moved west, coughing from the tuberculosis that doctors said the dry air might ease, and he picked a brand new name, borrowed, the story goes, from a Renaissance painter named Cosimo Roselli, a man whose work hangs in the Sistine Chapel. A tubercular street kid from the tenements named himself after church frescoes. Filippo Sacco was gone. John Roselli existed. And here is the detail to file away. John Roselli was a man who did not exist on paper. He was never naturalized. He was never a citizen. Remember that. 50 years later, it comes back with handcuffs. Other hoods collected debts. Johnny collected people. That was the skill, visible from the start. He was tall, tanned, beautifully dressed, soft-spoken, with silver hair by middle age, and manicured hands that never seemed to do the work everyone knew they arranged. He came up through Prohibition-era Chicago, in the orbit of the Capone organization, and by the late 1920s the outfit had sent him to Los Angeles to work alongside the local boss, Jack Dragner. Officially, Johnny was a nobody in California. Unofficially, he was Chicago's eyes on the film business. And in the 1930s, the film business was about to learn what Chicago had planned for it. Here's how the scheme actually worked, because nobody breaks this down properly. The opportunity was simple. Hollywood studios were factories, and factories run on labor. One union, the stagehands and projectionists of IATSE, could shut off the projectors in thousands of theaters across America overnight. A dark theater earns nothing, which meant the man who controlled that union didn't need to rob the studios. The studios would pay him not to use it. The inside connection came from Chicago. In 1934, the outfit installed two of its own at the top of the union. A Chicago hustler named Willie Bioff, a thick, crude former pimp with a genius for extortion, and a pliable union man named George Brown. Bioff made the threats. And in Los Angeles, Johnny Roselli played the other instrument entirely. He was the diplomat. He drank with the studio bosses. He became so close to Harry Cohn, the tyrant who ran Columbia Pictures, that the two men wore matching friendship rings. When Cohn needed money to tighten his grip on Columbia, the loan, by multiple accounts, moved through Roselli's world. The studio's labor problem and the studio's problem solver were the same organization. That was the beauty of it. The execution was almost boring. Every year, the major studios paid $50,000 apiece for labor peace. The smaller ones paid $25,000. Cash, handed over quietly, written off somewhere in the production budgets. In exchange, strikes evaporated, and union raises that should have gone to workers were traded away at the table. Do the math the way the outfit did. A handful of studios every single year, through the biggest boom Hollywood had ever seen, federal prosecutors would eventually tally the take at well over $1 million, north of $20 million in today's money, siphoned off the movie business before a single frame reached a screen. Then came the problem. Two problems, actually. The first was Willie Bioff's taxes. The government caught him, squeezed him, and in 1943 the crude man did the crude thing. He talked. The indictments reached all the way into the outfit's leadership. On the morning the charges came down, Chicago boss Frank Nitti walked into a rail yard and shot himself rather than face prison. Johnny Roselli didn't get that option. He was convicted in 1944 and sentenced to 10 years. And then, in 1947, after barely 3.5, he was quietly paroled, a release so fast and so fragrant that Congress investigated how it happened. Even his punishments had connections. Out of prison, Roselli pulled off one of the strangest second acts in mob history. He became a movie producer. Real credits, real pictures, hard-boiled crime films made on the same lots he'd once taxed. By day he had an office, a secretary, story meetings. By night, he remained exactly what he had always been, the outfit's man in the West, with points and interests moving through the new city, rising out of the Nevada desert. Las Vegas in the 1950s was carved up between families, and it needed what Johnny provided better than anyone alive. A man every faction trusted to broker the split. No title, no listed address. Just the silver fox at the corner table, sorting out who owned what percentage of the future. And that the reputation, the reach, the discretion is what brought the United States government to his table. You have to understand what happened next for what it actually was, because there is no version of it that isn't astonishing. In 1960, the Central Intelligence Agency decided Fidel Castro should die before Cuba's revolution hardened into a permanent Soviet outpost. The agency could not be seen anywhere near the job, so it went shopping for people who killed for a living and could never admit working for Washington. It went to the Mafia through a cutout named Robert Maheu, a former FBI man and fixer for billionaire Howard Hughes, a man whose entire career was making deniable things happen. In September of 1960, by the CIA's own later declassified account, Maheu sat down with Johnny Roselli in New York and made the pitch. The agency needed Castro removed. The budget on the table, $150,000. Roselli's response is the hinge of this entire story. He turned the money down. He turned the money down and said he'd do it as a loyal American. The man the government wouldn't let become a citizen volunteered for its most secret war for free. Roselli brought in two partners under code names. Sam Gold was Sam Giancana, the boss of Chicago itself, a sharp-faced, volatile man who ran the outfit from Oak Park and who, incredibly, was sharing a girlfriend with the president-elect of the United States. The quiet one, Joe, was Santo Trafficante, the boss of Tampa, the mob's man in Havana, a soft-spoken figure in heavy glasses who had lost a casino empire to Castro and buried more men than anyone could count. The CIA's technical people produced poison botulinum toxin pressed into pills, a batch of 6, and the pills moved through Roselli's chain toward Cuban contacts, positioned near Castro's food. One had access and lost it. Another took the pills and the money and produced nothing. Then, in April of 1961, the Bay of Pigs invasion collapsed on the beach, and Phase 1 of the Castro plots collapsed with it. Phase 2 belonged to a CIA officer named William Harvey, a heavy-set, hard-drinking legend who kept a pistol on his desk and ran the agency's assassination portfolio. Harvey took over the Roselli channel in 1962, and something happened that nobody planned. The spy and the gangster became genuine friends. Harvey would defend Johnny for the rest of his life. Keep him in mind. His name comes back near the end, in the worst way. But that's not the crazy part. The crazy part is how the secret got loose inside the government itself. In the fall of 1960, as a favor inside the operation, Maho's people bugged a Las Vegas hotel room for Sam Giancana, who suspected his girlfriend was involved with a comedian. The bugman got caught. The FBI pulled the thread, and the thread led somewhere impossible. A CIA assassination partnership with the two men J. Edgar Hoover's bureau was chasing hardest. By May of 1962, the agency had to sit across from Attorney General Robert Kennedy and confess it had hired the Mafia while Robert Kennedy was running the most aggressive war on the Mafia in American history. The government was prosecuting its own hitmen. Read that again. For Johnny Roselli, the 1960s ended the way they ended for everyone in his world, with the FBI on his shoulder. Agents tracing his life backward found something no one else had ever bothered to check. The fingerprints of the polished Hollywood fixer matched a Boston juvenile file belonging to a boy named Filippo Sacco. John Roselli, legally speaking, did not exist, and Filippo Sacco was an alien who had never registered, never naturalized, and could be deported. Then came the Friars Club. Between 1962 and 1967, at the Beverly Hills Club, where the entertainment elite played high-stakes gin rummy, a crew had drilled peepholes in the ceiling and wired Confederates below, fleecing celebrities and businessmen out of hundreds of thousands. Roselli was in on the skim. In 1968 he was convicted the card cheating and the truth about his name. The government he had worked for free now had him facing prison and deportation to an Italy he hadn't seen since he was a child. So Johnny reached for his insurance policy. In 1971, through his lawyer, the story of the CIA Mafia plots was walked into the office of Jack Anderson, the most feared syndicated columnist in Washington. The column ran: "The secret was now half-loose deniable, sourceless, but printed. The message to everyone in Washington was unmistakable. If Johnny Roselli goes down, Johnny Roselli talks." The deportation stalled. He served his time, walked out in 1973, and settled in quietly with his sister in Plantation, Florida. An old man now. Golf in the mornings. Espresso in the afternoons. The theory he was betting his life on was simple. Nobody kills the man holding the insurance policy. Here's where it gets interesting. In 1975, the theory met the United States Senate. The Church Committee had convened to drag the intelligence agency's darkest programs into the light, and the Castro plots were at the top of the pile. The committee wanted the men who ran them. On June 19th, 1975 days before Sam Giancana was scheduled to face committee investigators, someone walked into Giancana's Oak Park basement while he fried sausage and peppers at his stove, put a silenced .22 caliber round into the back of his head, then rolled him over and fired 6 more in a circle around his mouth. In the old language of the outfit, a bullet in the mouth is not concealment. It is commentary. The message was about talking. Johnny Roselli got the message. And he testified anyway. 5 days after Giancana's murder, he sat before the senators and laid out the plots, the pitch, the pills, the code names, the free labor. He came back and testified again. And in April of 1976 he returned a third time to talk about the question underneath every other question of that decade, whether the plots against Castro had somehow boomeranged into Dallas in November of 1963. Roselli himself had helped plant that theory in the press through Jack Anderson, a story that conveniently made him a patriot and a victim. Treat it as what it was, unproven, self-serving, and impossible to ignore. The committee couldn't ignore it either. There was talk of calling him yet again. The circle was closing. In June of 1976, William Harvey, the CIA officer who ran the plots, Johnny's friend, the other living man who knew everything, died of complications from heart surgery. Giancana, murdered before testimony. Harvey, dead in June. Roselli was now the last man standing who had been inside the room at every stage. Friends told him to get out of Florida. He didn't. He kept his routines. He kept his golf dates. And in the last stretch of July, by accounts that surfaced in the investigation, the old man went to dinner with an old associate from the Castro operation Santo Traficante. What was said at that table? Nobody living will say. On July 28, 1976, Johnny Roselli left his sister's house in Plantation around lunchtime in a silver Chevrolet Impala, telling her he was off to play golf. He never came back. Days later, the Impala turned up parked at Miami International Airport, the oldest trick in the book, a car at the airport to whisper that the missing man skipped town. Nobody who knew Johnny believed it. Investigators came to believe the truth was simpler and colder, that a 71-year-old man was invited onto a boat by men he trusted, because you do not get Johnny Roselli onto the water with strangers. Somewhere on that water he was garroted, stabbed, and prepared for disposal by men who had done this before, the legs sawn off to fit the drum, the chain wrapped tight, the holes punched through the steel so the bay would swallow the whole package permanently. The holes with a professional touch, the holes with a guarantee. But decomposition makes gas, and gas lifts. 10 days after Johnny Roselli vanished, the barrel that was never supposed to float, floated. The barrel that was never supposed to float, floated. So what happened to everyone else? Nothing. That is the ending, and it is the point. No one was ever arrested for the murder of Johnny Roselli. No one was ever charged. A Miami homicide investigation and a federal grand jury both ran into the same wall of silence the outfit had been building for 50 years. Sam Giancana's murder was never solved either. 2 of the 3 mobsters in the CIA's Castro operation were executed within 13 months of each other on the eve of testimony, and the official answer in both files is a shrug. Santo Traficante, the third man, the quiet one, was suspected by investigators, by reporters, and by half the underworld of arranging the barrel. He was never charged with anything. He died in 1987, on an operating table during heart surgery, and years later his own lawyer claimed the old man had made damning admissions near the end. Those claims are disputed, unverifiable, and convenient. The accounts vary. What's documented is that Santo Traficante outlived every man who could have contradicted him. Robert Maheu, the cutout who recruited Johnny, lived to 90, telling interviewers to the end that Roselli had acted out of genuine patriotism. Jack Anderson kept his columns and his sources, and took the full truth to his grave in 2005. And the United States government responded to everything the Church Committee uncovered with a new rule. In early 1976, by executive order, the President of the United States formally banned political assassination. 5 months later, somebody assassinated the committee's star witness, sawed off his legs, and sank him in a bay. The ban, it turned out, applied only to governments.